did Intel finally make Arrow Lake the legitimate competitor everybody was hoping it would be 18 months ago? Look, in those 18 months, Intel has done nothing but get manhandled by AMD. And look, this new 200K plus series, it does things a lot differently, right? Instead of going for the high-end CPU category, sort of competing with AMD's X3D chips, Intel did something very, very different. They're focused on affordability, giving gamers and enthusiasts more for their money. Basically, they're abandoning the high-end gaming market to Ryzen X3D chips by updating the Ultra 5 and Ultra 7 series. But get this, not the Ultra 9. And the 285K, well, it's essentially being replaced by a $300 CPU. Anyways, the biggest news here is, other than the price, the Ultra 7 270K Plus and 250K Plus get a pretty significant bump in their core layouts. So from a core count perspective, they're aligned with the 285K and 265K rather than the original i7s and i5s. And while the P&E cores haven't been impacted all that much, there's been a lot of tuning to secondary frequencies like the uncore and some major software optimization that should significantly boost performance. So much so that Intel's claiming the 270K Plus will easily beat the 285K in gaming. Pair that up with some very, very aggressive pricing. I mean, we're getting 24 and 20 core processors for $300 or less. And it looks like Intel may finally have listened to feedback, or they've simply realized they don't have the architecture or pricing structure necessary to compete directly with AMD's X3D processors in gaming. So that's the high level view. And look, I'm gonna get into all the nuts and bolts of what Intel's doing here a little bit later. But what I wanted to tackle right away are the gaming benchmarks. Basically, what we're doing is testing every system here at their highest rated JEDEC memory speeds with the latest chipset drivers and Windows install alongside an RTX 5090. This is being done at two different settings: 1080p with medium-low presets to alleviate as much GPU bottlenecking as possible, and also 1440p with maxed out settings. At 1080p low to medium settings, the 270K Plus is significantly better than a 265K in the vast majority of titles. Sometimes we're seeing an increase of almost 20%, which is a huge accomplishment, because to get to that point, Intel didn't do any significant changes to the architecture, cache, or even the P&E core clocks for that matter. That performance boost also moves this $300 CPU ahead of the 285K, a processor that was launched about 18 months ago for double the price. Then again, there's still some games out there that are slightly GPU bottlenecked, even at our 1080p settings. And in those, it becomes a statistical dead heat between most of these Intel processors. The same can be said about the $200 250K Plus, which is within spitting distance of the 285K. And there are times when it takes an almost unbelievable step upwards from where the 245K was, hitting just over 15% higher frame rates, or even more in a few situations. Naturally, those leads do shrink a bit at 1440p, but that's the nature of GPU bottlenecking, guys. The frame rate differences from one processor to another become almost imperceptible, even with the highest end GPU on the market. Then again, there are a few titles where even this higher resolution with its maxed out detail settings shows both Plus series chips pretty comfortably ahead of their predecessors. And yet there's a little bit of a problem lurking here too. From the get-go, Arrow Lake processors had some major issues competing against the Ryzen 9000 series, and in most situations at least, that hasn't really changed here. What we're seeing is Intel just evening out the playing field and absolutely not delivering anything we hadn't already seen from the AMD side of the fence. And I mean, yes, like any sign of life right now from the Arrow Lake lineup is definitely a benefit to Intel. And yes, both of these new processors do have some tangible benefits, but you have to ask yourself, is this like too little, too late? Well, if we take a step back and look at all of our tested games averaged out into a single performance tier, well, in a lot of ways, this is what people wanted when Arrow Lake was first launched. So yes, there's a little bit of frustration here. The 250K Plus and 270K Plus are priced the same as the 9600X and 9700X. And for all intents and purposes, they're all tied in performance too. But if you dive a bit deeper, the Ryzen CPUs do deliver better 1% lows at both of our tested resolutions and settings, which means they have better frame time consistency. So I don't really think this will cause people to start sort of magically jumping back into the Intel bandwagon. Because sure, they're more competitive, right? And that is a good thing, make no mistake about it. This is good news for Intel and for people who are buying a new system in this pricing tier. But I just feel like it's a little bit too late here. If this was rolled out with the original Arrow Lake processors 18 months or heck, even like 12 months ago, the landscape would have looked very, very different. It's almost like this is sort of a, I guess you would call it a tech demo about what Intel is looking to accomplish with their next generation of processors. And it is a very good look. But you know what else is a really good look? This case from Thermaltake.
Mint strawberry, butter caramel, future dusk. All sounds like dessert, right? But these are all flavors of power. Because performance doesn't have to be black or white. This is the View 600, a full tower built for serious cooling, clean cable runs, and builds that deserve to be seen. You love the user experience and how it feels like someone's actually thought this through, and like why didn't they do this sooner? This is full tower performance in designer flavor. The View 600 by Thermaltake, pick your flavor below.
But anyways, with that out of the way, how did we actually get here? What is the sort of like secret sauce that Intel has been cooking up behind the scenes to make the 200K plus series what it is right now? And where do all of these improvements actually come from? Well, you might think one of those is the higher officially supported peak memory speeds. And you'd be right if you were looking only at the specs. The ability to run natively up to 7,200 megatransfers per second or even more seems to be a pretty major benefit, right? Well, on paper it is, but in reality it actually isn't. When running at identical latencies, there's an imperceptible difference between 6,400 and 7,200 at 1080p low when averaged across all our games. And basically, they're identical performance-wise at higher settings. I mean, sure, there's some games that'll benefit from increased bandwidth, but from our testing at least, those are few and far between. Latency tends to matter more than bandwidth for most games. Here's the ironic thing though, a 9800 X3D with DDR5 6000 memory costs about the same as the 270K plus with DDR5 7200 modules. So luckily these new processors don't seem to lose much if any performance when stepping down to a slightly lower memory tier. So that essentially rules out memory frequencies from being one of the major contributing factors to the overall performance increases that we saw for the 200K plus series over the previous generation. So what else does that leave us? Well, one of the things that Intel has done is they've gone to sort of like the back of the house and massaged a lot of their secondary frequencies too. Like there are some very, very minor tweaks to the P and E core speeds, but those are focused on all core workloads, not gaming. More importantly though, there's also been a pretty big increase in the die-to-die frequencies or uncore, and another shot of adrenaline has been given to the link between DRAM and the memory controllers. But look, you could already do a lot of this on current Arrow Lake processors with Intel's 200S boost feature that's selectable in the BIOS. The only difference here is these increases are built in rather than hiding behind an optional toggle switch. So that got me thinking, and I'm pretty sure you're thinking the exact same thing. Are these new processors nothing more than their predecessors with a couple of cores added and the 200S boost feature enabled? Well, the answer to that is no. Even with that feature enabled and all the CPUs running at a normalized 7,200 megatransfers per second, the older ones do gain ground, but it's by an infinitesimal margin in gaming. Then again, a lot of these features benefits lie outside of gaming, so obviously Intel's done something else here. And that's with the new software stack. Yes, software for Intel and not hardware. Basically what Intel's saying here is that we've pushed this specific architecture as far as it's going to go in terms of clock speeds and whatnot. The only other area that we're going to see any benefits whatsoever is with sort of like massaging the software stack, building in some optimizations. Anyways, the biggest news here is that Intel is going back to what amounts to chipset drivers, or what they now call the Intel Platform Performance Package, or IPPP. For the best possible performance, you'll need to download download it from the websites of either Intel or the motherboard manufacturer. This package includes Intel's Application Optimization Tool, or APO, which is currently an optional download that houses app-specific performance profiles. With the K Plus series, it'll be baked into the software stack, but you can still turn it on and off manually. There's also new features like HWPGO and the Binary Optimization Tool, which are two deeper level optimization routines that work towards better utilizing the CPU's resources to enhance performance, particularly, again, in gaming. So obviously these sort of pieces of Intel's software puzzle all fitting into place quite nicely, alongside a couple of the other tweaks that they did to the architecture and internal clock speeds, are the reason why we're seeing the performance uplifts that we're actually seeing right now. But that should also make you wonder, could this software also work on older Arrow Lake CPUs? Because fundamentally, there's no differences in the architecture here. Unfortunately, according to Intel, the answer is no, at least not for now. And trust me, I pressed them on this hard, but supposedly it's because there are some minor architectural changes on the K Plus CPUs that make enablement of these technologies possible. But even with that being said, I'm pretty sure someone, somewhere will try backporting it. And you know what? They might actually be successful in that. So that's the gaming situation. But look, what Intel has done outside of that is probably going to be what caused a lot of people to sit up and take notice, because both of these new processors have more cores than their predecessors. And for creators or people who need to use multi-threaded workloads on a regular basis, that could be a critical update for them. And this is simply where these new CPUs and their additional cores really start seeing benefits, especially in their price ranges. Because right now, AMD doesn't have anything, and I mean anything, that can touch the 250K plus and 270K plus in all-core workloads, unless someone wants to pay a hell of a lot more. And remember, these processors are $200 and $300 respectively, so they set a new high watermark in the performance per dollar category in heavy use case scenarios. However, if we move to more mixed workloads that combine CPU and discrete GPU output like NLEs, and it becomes a statistical dead heat between the AMD CPUs we have here and Intel's new ones. As a matter of fact, the K Plus series doesn't really bring anything new to the table for creators. And there's another, I guess you would call it like unfortunate byproduct to adding more cores, increasing internal clocks, and tweaking things behind the scenes, all without moving to a new process node. And that, unfortunately, is higher power consumption and more heat production. In an all-core workload, we're looking at about 64 watts more for the 270 plus and 35 watts more for the 250 plus over the previous gen chips. So while yes, these processors are absolutely able to beat the Ryzen CPUs cleanly in multi-threaded benchmarks, well, they're a lot more power hungry too. And guess what that leads to? Well, the 270K plus almost overwhelms the Thermalright PA120 being used for this test, despite it running at 75% fan speed. I mean, we're still technically 14 degrees away from Intel's T-junction here, but I never, ever want to see 90 degrees or more on a CPU. And yes, the same situation arises in gaming. These processors might finally match similarly priced Ryzen models in raw frame rates, but they also need a whole lot more power. And that's a real problem if you care about overall efficiency when you're gaming, because you look at that 270K, right? And it is using just an epic amount more juice than the 9700X and even the 9800X 3D. Just to give you some context here, the 9950X 3D, which isn't shown here, well, that needed about 125 watts in the same test. Gaming temperatures, on the other hand, well, I guess you would call them a little bit more interesting than the other results. The 270K Plus obviously runs the hottest by a long shot, producing even more heat than the 9800X 3D and our lava hot 9600X, while the 250K Plus actually runs a bit cooler than the 9600X. And look, I also need to mention temperatures can vary wildly from one sample to the next, which is sort of like what we're seeing with the 9600X here. So use our numbers as a small snapshot to gauge your cooler purchase, rather than what'll absolutely happen with every single CPU out there. So where does this leave us? And look, I'll say this straight up to all of you. These are two very, very good CPUs. Intel did exactly what they needed to sort of like stop the bleeding in the Arrow Lake lineup, in their entire consumer portfolio. These things, they work pretty good and they offer more gaming performance and, in my opinion, some insane value if you need multi-threaded performance. But is it too little, too late? And personally, I think it is. With the price of motherboards, memory, and basically every frickin' thing else, people care not just about short-term benefits, but also long-term value. And that's where Intel, unfortunately, really falls flat, because Arrow Lake and the 1851 socket are both dead ends. There's no upgrade path with their next-gen CPUs supposedly needing yet another new socket. Meanwhile, we all know AM5 will live on all the way through Zen 6, and in many ways, that gives AMD a huge leg up. And look, from performance to pricing and everything else, you name it, the 200K Plus series is obviously meant as an olive branch extended out to gamers and enthusiasts, a sort of like peace offering. And in many ways, it absolutely is. But you know what would be even better right now? Guaranteeing the investment people make in this platform right now in 2026 will last them through a few more upgrade cycles, that it's not a dead end. And maybe, just maybe then, we're all gonna start believing a little bit more in what Intel is selling right now, because this is a start and they need to continue it into the future. So anyways, I'm Mike with Hardware Canucks, and I will see you in the next one. Have a great day, guys.